The committee will come to order. Welcome and thank you all for joining today's hearing, which is entitled A Review of Title VIII, the Forestry Stakeholder Perspectives. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open to questions. First, I'd like to recognize our chairman of our whole committee, Mr. G.T. Thompson, for an opening statement that he may have.
Well, thank you, Chairman Lamalfa and Ranking Member Salinas. I appreciate today's hearing and the opportunity to hear from this great panel of witnesses. Today's hearing marks the first event of the newly formed Forestry Subcommittee. With the great challenges we have in the national forest system and forested regions of the country, it's my hope that this subcommittee can shine a brighter spotlight on the needs of the forest sector, especially as we begin the Farm Bill process. Since joining the House Committee on Agriculture 2 farm bills ago, I've been proud of the subcommittee and the full committee's forestry achievements, specifically in supporting the Forest Service, non-federal forest managers, partnership agreements, forest research, and new markets for forest products. Still, forested regions have many significant challenges that need to be addressed. For decades, we've witnessed timber harvest decline on national forest lands, which undermines forest health, rural jobs, and the local economy, and revenue to counties and local public schools. We're also facing a nationwide forest health crisis and a wildfire crisis in the West. In my district, we continue to have great challenges with invasive insects and plants and diseases that further undermine forest health. In the West, not only are they dealing with serious forest health issues like invasives, but wildfires remain the number one issue, devastating communities and destroying homes, property, and millions of acres of forest land. I appreciate, although it was a very solemn experience, just a matter of within the past month of being in Paradise, California with our chairman, community that he represents. It was devastated just a couple years ago with the loss of 95 lives. And so just an outcome, the most extreme outcome, of poor forest health and a lack of robust forest management practices. By ramping up the forest management, there are very real challenges that we can and must aggressively confront. 3 weeks ago, this committee held a Farm Bill listening session in Tulare, California, and that was a part of that. I was proud to join the chairman and his district and meet with the Regional Forest Service as well as the local forestry and forest product industry. We that opportunity, that visit, the visit to Paradise, was an eye-opening experience to see that firsthand and a reminder of what can happen when we don't do enough to manage our most at-risk forest lands. Unfortunately, this is just one fire, and we've seen some of the most difficult fire seasons in recent years. We must get more aggressive with how we treat landscapes, leverage partnerships, and actively reduce the threat of wildfire. And I'm hopeful that as we undertake the writing of the next Farm Bill, that we can build on the gains that we made in 2014-18 laws and consider new ways to help the Forest Service better manage, increase partnerships, and do the restoration work that is badly needed on the tens of millions of acres identified by the agency. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and hearing what recommendations that you have for the upcoming Farm Bill. I'd also like to personally extend a special welcome to Director Schulzenberger for being here today from Pennsylvania. And with that, I thank the chairman and ranking member, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, and it's certainly been a pleasure to be able to first be given the responsibility of chairing this subcommittee and to work with you all these years, including this new session, as we try and get a fast start, and indeed we are, on the Farm Bill and the issues with our forests in this country. So thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Now I'd like to also recognize our distinguished ranking member, the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Salinas, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I'm very pleased to join this subcommittee and thank my colleagues on this sub. Thank the chairman, Mr. LaMalfa, and very honored to be serving as the ranking, and I look forward to working with the gentleman from California. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. I know it takes a good amount of work to pull together testimony, and I appreciate all of you sharing your perspectives and really providing some insight as we move forward on the 2018 Farm Bill. Healthy forests are critical to our nation, both environmentally, ecologically, and economically. And my home state of Oregon, as you all know, shows how interconnected and intertwined these issues are. Farm Bill programs and authorities play an important role in both private forestry and management of our national forest system lands. And today's hearing is an important first step and an important first opportunity to hear from our stakeholders on how those current authorities and programs are actually used and implemented by land managers and forest product users to responsibly build rural prosperity and improve forest health. And I look forward to hearing today from the witnesses on those opportunities for improvement and challenges with current implementation efforts. And I want to again thank the ranking member, the Chairman LaMalfa for arranging this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Salinas. I look forward to our work together as we, with our neighboring states, have faced extreme challenges with forestry and wildfire, et cetera. So we'll find a lot of common ground on that, I'm sure. So for my statement, I just want to say thank you again for being here and for this very first committee of the new Congress for the Subcommittee on Forestry. We'll focus on Title VIII of the 2018 Farm Bill, and we'll receive testimony from our panel of industry partners for their feedback. We hope to hear what is working, what isn't, and what recommendations our panel has for improvements for the next Farm Bill due this fall. Across the West, of course, we continue to face a wildfire and forest health crisis. As we begin turning our attention to the next Farm Bill and discussions on this title, this committee and Congress as a whole need to understand that this is a true crisis. The pace and scale of active management on these forests and landscapes must be drastically increased, and this must happen right now. We must undertake the paradigm shift that the U.S. Forest Service has been calling for and dramatically increase the management to restore forest health, protect rural residents, air quality, water quality, and reduce the threat of catastrophic wildfire. As you know, that our Ag Committee oversees the USDA. The U.S. Forest Service is a component within the USDA, therefore within our purview. The Forest Service has approximately 193 million acres in its charge, and so that's the nexus that we have here today in this committee and in our obligations in the Ag Committee. So in the past 5 years alone, we've seen some of the most destructive wildfires on record, especially in California. In my own district, we have seen several of these fires. The 2018 Camp Fire, as our chairman mentioned, in Paradise and surrounding areas on the ridge in northeast Butte County. The 2020 North Complex Fire, which was several fires in eastern Butte County and stretching into others. The million acre, say this to yourself for a minute, the million acre Dixie Fire in 2021, which devastated most of Greenville, another town known as Canyon Dam, and touched and threatened many others. And these are just a handful of the many fires. You can't name them all. Since 2000, we've averaged more than 70,000 wildfires per year and an average of 7 million acres burned annually. This acreage is more than double the average number during the 1990s. Since 2018, we've had 4 fire seasons that have exceeded 7 million acres, including 2020, when 10.1 million acres burned. We don't really even have a fire season anymore, as such as it's a year-round fire year. And this has effects not just in the West. We saw during the Dixie Fire that the smoke plume was so massive that it lifted and went across the entire country and affected air quality on East Coast cities where there was advisories for people not to go out and engage in athletic activity. So what does this mean? The Forest Service must get more aggressive in its pace and scale of forest land treatment. It must increase the partnerships with whether it's the private sector, local government, local tribes, and other third parties that can harvest, thin more trees that would otherwise only contribute to declining forest health in our overpopulated forests, and of course the threat of the outbreak of new wildfires. As told to me by members fighting those fires, especially in 2021 during the Million-Acre Dixie Fire, those firefighters on the ground have never seen the conditions like they have. With the acute level of dryness, the dryness factor was such that it was overwhelming what they had to deal with. Over the past 30 years, we've fallen way behind with our forest health and management goals, as well as timber harvest needed to promote that health. We only harvest about a third of the timber we did at the peak on Forest Service lands, and routinely fall short of our allowable sale quality across the National Forest System. Indeed, the number of board feet growing in the forest each year massively outstrips the amount that's being harvested, falling farther and farther behind on inventory. The Forest Service is carrying out its proposed 10-year strategy to confront the wildfire crisis. Through this plan, the Forest Service has identified some 20 million acres of federal land and another 30 million acres of adjacent non-federal lands that are at the highest threat of catastrophic wildfire and in need of immediate treatment. This would be carried out over a 10-year period. Billions of dollars have been appropriated by Congress to the Forest Service over the past year and a half to help support this work. Yet funding alone will not fix the massive problems we have with wildfire in our forests. As the agency is moving forward with this work, this committee needs to know what tools, what authorities, or other resources the agency needs, and they must be vocal about it. And all of our other partners must help to ensure that this work actually gets done as well. The Farm Bill should be used to help address some of these challenges in the West and across the National Forest System. The Forestry title of the Farm Bill contains a variety of provisions, and we must expand the management authorities in this law. For example, the 2018 Farm Bill contained a renewal of the insect and disease categorical exclusion, expanded it to include hazardous fuels reduction. This is a common sense change as disease and invasive species contribute to worsening forest health. Federal lands are not good neighbors because they are overstocked and overgrown, allowing forests to become tinderboxes ready to ignite onto adjacent private lands. We must expand the good neighbor authority to encourage more partnerships with states, counties, and tribes who have the ability to efficiently get projects done on the ground that will prevent wildfire and more timely. More also needs to be done to help discourage litigation that only serves to undermine common sense management projects that will help prevent wildfire. This includes legislating a full cottonwood fix, a court decision which has held up delayed forest restoration projects since 2015. The last Farm Bill also expanded the landscape scale restoration program on cross-boundary restoration and authorized new tools that allow for the collaborative treatment of hazardous fuels loads on bordering non-federal lands. We need more of these authorities and partnerships that allow the Forest Service to administer these treatments immediately, which is needed on these at-risk acres, to increase the pace and scale. The megafires we continue to see are not normal wildfires. We don't have to accept this as a new normal. Because they are landscape scale wildfires, the proactive treatments must also be landscape scale to prevent them from breaking out in the first place. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here this morning and in person. I know it's not easy to come to Washington, D.C. with travel and taxi and hotels all being expensive and a pain in the rear getting sometimes, I'll tell you. So we appreciate your valuable time and willingness to participate with us. We look forward to hearing your testimonies and sharing your expertise and recommendations with this committee as we ramp up this Farm Bill process. So, seeing who we have here today, we'll move into our witnesses. The chair would request that any other members that would wish to submit their opening statements for record so that we can have these I can't talk. So the witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there's ample time for questions. So our first witness today is Mrs. Ellen Schulzebarger, who is the state forester for the state of Pennsylvania. How'd you manage that, Mr. Chairman? She is testifying today on behalf of the National Association of State Foresters. Okay, then our next witness will be Mr. Skip Brandt, who is in the 1st District, Idaho County Commissioner. He is testifying today on behalf of the National Association of Counties. Our third witness is Mr. Bill Imbergamo, the Executive Director of the Federal Forest Resource Coalition. And our fourth and final is Mr. Patrick Holmes, who is the Vice President of Urban Policy at American Forests. So thank you all for joining. Let's proceed to your testimony. And each of you will have 5 minutes. The timer in front of you will count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. So, Ms. Schultzberger, please begin when you are ready.
Well, all right. How about I start over? Good morning, all, and thank you, Chairman LaMalfa, Ranking Member Salinas, and members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing today and allowing me the opportunity to testify on behalf of the National Association of State Foresters. I'm Ellen Schulzebarger, and I'm the Pennsylvania State Forester, and I also serve as treasurer for the NASF. NASF represents the directors of the forestry agencies in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, 5 U.S. territories, and the 3 nations and compacts of free association in the U.S. State foresters manage and protect state and private forests, which encompass nearly 2/3 of all forests nationwide. State forestry agencies are the primary delivery system for forest management activities, which include delivering technical and financial assistance to private landowners, protecting forest health and water resources, promoting the stewardship of all forests, including those in rural, community, and urban areas, and performing wildfire prevention and suppression across the country. This morning, I'd like to highlight a few policy priorities NASF has identified for the next Farm Bill. First, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides flexible funding for the State Forest Action Plan implementation, allowing states to address the highest forest management priorities. NASF supports creating an authorization of appropriation in the 2023 Farm Bill to ensure this flexible funding is secured into the future to enable states to effectively target State Forest Action Plan priority needs. Second, the 2018 Farm Bill expanded the Good Neighbor Authority to allow tribes and counties to enter into Good Neighbor agreements. However, they were not afforded the authority to retain G&A revenues that would be reinvested back into those landscapes, greatly reducing the incentive to engage and partner on critical landscape projects. Additionally, the 2018 Farm Bill removed the ability for forest restoration services to take place off federal lands under established Good Neighbor agreements. This means that adjacent state, tribal, county, or other lands that are essential to the health and productivity of the national forests can no longer be restored as a comprehensive landscape with the revenues generated from G&A projects. NASF supports authorizing counties and tribes to retain and reinvest G&A project revenues, while also supporting the removal of the requirement that revenue must be spent solely on federal lands. Third, the 2018 Farm Bill codified the landscape scale restoration program, but also stipulated a new rural requirement for LSR, resulting in a subsequent rulemaking by the Forest Service limiting LSR work to communities of less than 50,000 people. This change has significantly reduced the scope and efficacy of the program, eliminating many opportunities to work in critical communities to address large-scale issues such as the wildfire risk reduction, watershed protection and restoration, and the spread of invasive plant, insects, and diseases. For example, many of these ineligible communities are found within high wildland-urban interface areas and are impacted by the spread of invasive pests or diseases. NASF supports modifying the language of the 2018 Farm Bill that designated LSR strictly as rural to allow for the program to address all identified critical forestry issues nationwide. Fourth, NASF supports an all-lands approach to reforestation by creating an authorization for appropriations in the Farm Bill to elevate and support the Forest Service Reforestation Nurseries and Genetic Resources Program, or RINGER, which supports federal, state, tribal, and private nurseries and seed orchards. This funding authorization would expand staffing to provide more technical assistance and training, to create opportunities for nurseries to upgrade old infrastructure, to promote practices to increase seedling production and also seed quality, and will better allow the Forest Service to serve as a convener for the increasing nationwide nursery, tree improvement, and tree planting efforts and great needs. We appreciate the subcommittee holding this important hearing today to review the forestry provisions from the 2018 Farm Bill and to work toward developing the next Farm Bill. I would also like to thank you, Chairman Thompson, for your longstanding support and leadership in forestry issues and opportunities across the U.S. and in Pennsylvania. And thank you for establishing this subcommittee. Thank you so much for the time and your considerations of NASF's recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Schultzbarger, for your testimony and your thoughts on that. We look forward to posing some questions a little bit later in the hearing today. I appreciate your thoughts. So let's send it over to Mr. Brandt for 5 minutes. So go when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Thompson, Chairman LaMalfa, and Ranking Member Salinas, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing as negotiations are underway for the 2023 Farm Bill to see how it can strengthen the partnership between counties and federal counterparts. I am here today on behalf of the National Association of Counties. My name is Skip Brandt, and I serve as County Commissioner in Idaho County, Idaho, since 2007. I'm a lifelong Idaho County resident. Although we only have just over 17,000 residents, Idaho County is the largest county in the state by area. We have 5.5 million acres of land in our borders. 4.5 million acres of those lands are federally managed. That is larger than Connecticut and Rhode Island put together. While the national forests within our jurisdiction represent a major economic asset for our communities we serve, many of those challenges that we face are also rooted in those public lands and our relationships with the federal agencies that manage them. The 2023 Farm Bill represents a unique opportunity to re-examine the role of the counties in management of the public lands and consider a new approach of federal policy that can better support current challenges from the county's perspective and other local governments. Therefore, I'd like to discuss a few points for the committee's consideration. First, the counties can serve as an integral role in the management of public lands throughout the country. Powers authorized in the Farm Bill, such as the Good Neighbor Authority and shared stewardship contracting, allow counties to partner with the federal agencies to jointly plan and implement land management decisions. County government can also contribute resources and expertise as a cooperating agency under NEPA, and often bring much needed insight into local conditions that may otherwise be absent from the discussions. In turn, counties can provide essential services, law enforcement, infrastructure, as well as search and rescue. Idaho County has enjoyed a strong working relationship with the Forest Service. Most recently, we partnered with the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest on a Selway Middle Fork Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Project. Despite the success that we have enjoyed in working with our federal partners, we often are hampered in the ability to help them manage our forest in support of our communities. Our county government operates under the economic constraints that 83% of our land is under federal management and therefore exempt from local taxes. We must also deal with the complications presented by our limited ability to influence federal land management decisions and the bureaucratic obstacles that interfere with the Forest Service's mission to accomplish good managed forests. This has been particularly an area of concern given the increase of catastrophic wildfires. Most of all ignite on federal lands. In the past, the Forest Service spent the bulk of its dollars on forest management, such as timber harvest and mechanical thinning. Instead, wildfire suppression has become its major priority today. This means fewer and fewer resources are being devoted to treatment of the forest every year, a challenge that is amplified by the Forest Service's ongoing struggles in hiring and retaining employees. Through the Farm Bill's forestry title, there are additional tools that our forest or federal partners can leverage to help local governments address natural resource management challenges. First, we can continue to promote the collaboration in public lands management by reauthorizing the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program and the Landscape Scale Restoration Program. When talking about truly treating land to combat wildfire, a few hundred-acre project is simply inadequate to get the job done. Reauthorizing these crucial programs would allow local government to partner with the Forest Service and give them more capacity to get things done on the ground. Finally, counties support fully extending the eligibility under the Good Neighbor Authority to counties. In the 2018 Farm Bill, counties and tribes were not afforded the same authority as states to retain and reinvest GNA project receipts. Ensuring that counties can take full advantage of Good Neighbor Authority will facilitate better land management decisions that are based on local impacts and needs. Chairman LaMalfa and Ranking Member Salinas, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for inviting me to testify today. I just note that the lands will be managed one way or the other. They can be lightly managed by us, or they are going to be managed by Mother Nature. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Brandt. Let's go to Mr. Imbrogamo for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman LaMalfa, Ranking Member Salinas, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Bill Imbrogamo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Federal Forest Resource Coalition, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. And we're very grateful for this committee's efforts to streamline management of the national forests. But I want to urge every member of the subcommittee to recall the horrific conditions we've seen in recent summers. While it's cold and wet now and it appears it will never stop snowing in the Sierras, we must remember that 80 million acres of national forests are at high risk to wildfire, insects, and drought. In 2020 and 21, severe fires blanketed the entire country with smoke, and with most of those fires burning on national forest land. While Congress reacted by giving the Forest Service new funding and new authorities to restore our forests, much more remains to be done. I want to hit on some important context straight away. More than half of the national forest system is already in highly restricted land uses, including wilderness areas, roadless areas, and others. The critical authorities this committee has enacted, including permanent stewardship contracting, expanded good neighbor authority, and categorical exclusions, do not open those lands to timber harvest. They do not waive a single forest plan standard or guideline. They merely give the Forest Service new tools to expedite management and work with partners on lands that are supposed to be managed under current law. And as I noted, my members work in communities surrounded by national forests, and many spend their days working on the forest themselves, conducting management that creates wildlife habitat, reduces hazardous fuels, and provides raw materials which support domestic manufacturing jobs in rural communities. In the 2023 Farm Bill, we urge the committee to build on the work done in previous farm bills, which were enacted with strong bipartisan support and were signed by presidents from both parties. And today I want to focus on two key items from my written statement. First, proposed changes to stewardship contracting, and second, key modifications to the Good Neighbor Program, which are very consistent with the remarks of my previous witnesses. Stewardship contracting has been in use for almost a quarter century and was made permanent in the 2014 Farm Bill. Stewardship contracts allow the Forest Service to trade goods for services, including using the value of timber to help pay for wildlife habitat improvement and other activities. Congress established 7 land management goals for stewardship, all of which are equal and equally laudable. Since it was enacted, it's become apparent that management goals are unattainable if there is no capacity to achieve them. Where there are no loggers, truckers, or wood-consuming facilities like sawmills, paper mills, or biomass energy plants, it is either prohibitively expensive or otherwise impossible to conduct forest management activities. Throughout the national forest system, stewardship treatment costs can vary widely, depending on whether there is a market for the wood or not. Where there are robust markets, treatments can pay for themselves. Where that's not the case, treatment costs can run between $3,000 and $6,000 per acre. That's why we're recommending adding an additional land management goal to the stewardship contracting, encouraging the retention of existing forest products infrastructure. This goal would not override the other goals established by Congress. It would merely make it an additional co-equal goal. Likewise, with Good Neighbor Authority, this committee has taken the lead on expanding the authority to all 50 states and making tribes and counties eligible. However, As my other witnesses have noted, the 2018 bill restricted the use of GNA receipts to federal lands. This restriction appeared in the bill at the last minute as the conference committee was winding down, and it threatens to dampen the purposes, defeat the purposes of the program and dampen state interest and participation. We urge you to make GNA permanent for both the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, and to allow GNA partners, including states, counties, tribes, to retain some of the receipts generated by GNA projects. We also urge you to amend GNA to allow for a limited amount of road construction. GNA projects could help relocate poorly designed roads to areas where they cause less concern and thus help address the substantial road maintenance backlog on our national forests. We also urge the committee to consider adding language directing the Forest Service to cut and remove hazard trees to safely reopen roads following catastrophic fires. Too often, we see large areas of national forest land become inaccessible for emergency response, recreational access, and future management following large fires. These changes and those discussed in depth in our written statement are intended to retain wood-using facilities, generate value from forest management, and help cover the costs associated with restoring our national forests. In addition to hazardous fuels reduction, forest management can help create and maintain a wide variety of habitat types, including habitat for listed species like the red-cockaded woodpecker and Kirtland's warbler, and declining species like the ruffed grouse. In conclusion, I appreciate the opportunity to testify and to discuss some of our priorities with you, and I look forward to working with you on a bill that improves the health of our forests and our rural communities.
Thank you, Mr. Bergamo. I think I said it
I answered it nearly anything.
more correctly that time, right? Okay, thank you. It's important. All right, lastly, Mr. Holmes, you're up for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Lamalfa, Ranking Member Salinas, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to appear before you today. I represent American Forests, the oldest national nonprofit conservation organization in the U.S. Since our founding in 1875, we've been guided by a very simple premise that the health and resiliency of the nation's forests and of our forested communities goes hand in hand. Our organization is very proud of a deep history dating back to our role in convening the first American Forest Conservation Congress in 1882 of supporting the forestry conservation movement, and we continue that work today. Notably, as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we led the coalition effort supporting the bipartisan Repairing Existing Public Land by adding Necessary Trees Act, known as the Replant Act, which will provide the Forest Service with the funding to plant or support the natural growth of more than 1.2 billion trees over the next decade. With that history as context, it's our pleasure to participate in this inaugural meeting of the subcommittee and to formally thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your role as a lead sponsor of the Replant Act and for your current leadership alongside the subcommittee for focusing deliberations in our field in the run-up to this new Farm Bill. As our President and CEO, Jad Daly, often says, we are one nation under trees. Forestry has a unique capacity to respond to some of our greatest challenges as a nation and to unite us around our divergent interests around shared goals. As members and my fellow witnesses have testified today, our forests face great challenges, and American Forests is committed to ensuring that our forest land managers have the tools and the resources they need to respond. To that end, the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018 made significant progress in areas of wildfire risk reduction, restoration of working forested landscapes, and bolstering markets for innovative wood products. While our organization emphatically supports those efforts as part of an effort to accelerate forest restoration and preventative measures in the face of the many threats others have noted today, we also believe that we must intensify efforts to recover our forest resources. Wildfires cause approximately 80% of reforestation needs on National Forest System lands, and alongside other threats, create substantial needs across all ownerships. Larger, more frequent, and more severe wildfires and shifting climate conditions are inhibiting our forest's abilities to regenerate on their own, eliminating nearby seed sources, altering conditions for success, and encouraging invasive species and shrubs that transform fire regimes. These are the conditions that are ripe for severe reburns and altogether forest loss across large swaths of our western landscapes. Although we often cite a history of past fire suppression as one of the leading causes of our current wildfire risk, we may one day look back at our failure to respond to these recovery needs as a dominant driver of our future forest and fire risks. A substantial portion of the 4 million acres of potential reforestation needs on National Forest System lands stems from wildfires over just a 2-year period of 2020 to 2021, which many have noted today was particularly severe. Passage of the Replan Act will help provide the resources to respond, but will only address about a quarter of the current identified needs of just our national forests and won't extend to address the emergent needs we expect that are coming and the needs confronting other land ownerships and amid other threats. To scale up, we must address a workforce and supply chain for reforestation that have atrophied among federal, state, and tribal nation partners. It sorely needs to be modernized and expanded. We further need to improve our planning and reforestation practices to tackle new, evolving real-world challenges. Many of the standard reforestation practices arose from controlled field trials, and they have to be adapted today to evaluate the source and genetics of different species and integrate fuels treatments to address recurring wildfire risks. No funding source or program is currently supporting this applied research and planning work, nor is any program unlocking innovative approaches to workforce needs across the supply chain among partners. In response to these needs, we wish to highlight 3 top priorities for this Farm Bill. First, authorize and significantly increase appropriations for the Reforestation Nursery and Genetics Resource Program, known as RINGER, within the Forest Service. RINGER is a vital but underfunded program. It needs to be expanded to at least $10 million per year to establish a predictable program of work to benefit state and tribal nurseries. Second, establish a new competitive grant funding opportunity for reforestation research, nursery, seed collection, storage, and workforce needs. Our state forest experiment stations, our college and universities can be leaders among public and private partners in helping to address these concerns. And third, establish loan and loan guarantee financing for nurseries serving public, private, and urban reforestation and recovery needs. Financing to expand and build new nursery capacity remains an important bottleneck in the supply chain that constrains the scope and scale of our work. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee today on behalf of American Forests. We look forward to being a leading and pragmatic voice in all facets of your forestry agenda for this Farm Bill and are grateful for all the work you will do on behalf of the nation's forests, your districts, and communities across the country moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for your testimony and your thoughts on that. So at this point, members' questions will be taken in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority, and in order of arrival for those who have joined us after the hearing has convened. You'll be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow as much question time as possible. Therefore, I will recognize myself for 5 minutes, but I'm going to immediately defer to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly, so that he can be in 2 places at once. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we have competing interests, and this was the most important hearing I had today on forestry. Mississippi is a huge forestry state. The pace and scale of forest management must be increased on millions of acres of forest lands. Despite the need to increase forest management, the Biden administration is creating new barriers for land managers. Commissioner Brandt, you stated in your testimony that federal regulations drastically reduce timber harvests within the National Forest System. Can you elaborate on these comments, please?
Well, as my witness to my left talked about access. Access is probably one of the largest issues dealing with timber management. If you can't afford to helicopter log everything, so you need to build roads. And roads, besides accessing the timber, also assist in fighting fire. One of the things right now in firefighting is that we're trying to do it completely by air again, and that's really expensive and not efficient. So I'd say the regulations on road restrictions is huge.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time to you.
reclaiming my time, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Let's see. Mr. Brandt, the forestry title has a clear impact on the timber community in Idaho County. Ranchers are also impacted by the way forestry programs are implemented. Over the last years, we've seen what happens federal policies to reduce hazardous fuels are incomplete or not effective. We know it's important to reduce the density of standing timber and prevent accumulation of fine fuels on the ground in order to have an effective strategy. Can you talk about how Idaho has implemented grazing as a land management tool particularly as a complement to the forestry work in your county and your experience?
Well, it's good to be popular on these questions. I would say that Idaho generally has a long track record of supporting grazing on public lands and to affect the grass element of the fires. However, because of access and the fire component, as well as in 1995, we were infected by the federal government with the Canadian gray wolf. And that poses a huge issue for grazers who stick their cattle out in the forest hinterlands and have these wolves chase cattle all over the place. Besides depredation, it affects, of course, the health of the cattle, and it pushes them off the grazing allotments, in which then, of course, the grazer gets in trouble for because his cattle aren't where they're supposed to be. And so the grazing component is a great tool, and I'd say that it's used a lot more in southwest Idaho because of the flatter terrain and the less wolves. But again, going back to the fire, if a fire breaks out, those cattlemen have to go in immediately and collect all those cows and get them out of harm's way, and that's not exactly easy to do.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go to Mr. Bergamo on Forest Service has only approved 8 fuel break projects using the categorical exclusions, the CEs, which were enacted in November of 21, covering fuels reduction on less than 13,000 acres. I mentioned earlier, Forest Service oversees 193 million acres, and their 10-year plan was to go after 20 million on their own lands. So the Forest Service has yet to issue guidance on National Forest System units on how to use the Emergency Actions Authority created in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In your view, is this a matter of lack of funding, manpower, or something else? And what additional authorities or allocations can Congress provide to increase the pace and scale, probably the authorities, I would imagine, to increase the pace and scale of management on Forest Service land? So again, is it a lack of funding, manpower, or other?
I'm hard-pressed to say, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, the Congress has provided substantial resources, about $800 million in the first 2022 supplemental, and then about $5 billion in the Infrastructure Act, and then about $1.5 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. So resources doesn't seem to be the issue. In terms of the emergency authorities in particular, the administration, USDA, began consultation with tribes on that only about 45 days ago, and that was enacted in November of 2021. To me, it doesn't impart a sense of urgency to begin working on an emergency authority after about 14 months of having it. So in terms of improving response, I think scaling up the number of acres they can treat under some of the categorical exclusions, but I think also just generally oversight of what's going on within the agency.
Okay, all right. We've burned my 5 minutes, so I will turn to our ranking member, Ms. Salinas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Holmes, and thank you to all the panelists for being here today. Your written testimony mentioned the Wildfire Funding Fix secured in the 2018 omnibus, and it was a great step towards stabilizing the budget on non-fire programs within the U.S. Forest Service. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act increased grant opportunities, particularly for partners as of January of this year, and in particular for Oregonians who have submitted a total of $63.4 million in federal grant requests to protect our forests and communities. However, we often hit these stopping points due to difficulties in navigating the agency or inadequate agency resources. How will the funding provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act increase agency capacity to better work with partners like yours?
Thank you, Ranking Member Salinas. The question's a great one, and I would frame the contribution of the new funding as game-changing. As you know, and as you stated, prior to the 2018 fix in funding, there was constant triage around the potential for fire borrowing to disrupt programs in any given year. Since that fix, there hasn't been significant increases until the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and now the Inflation Reduction Act. And that surge in funding offers the opportunity for organizations like American Forests to potentially move beyond a project-by-project partnership approach to one that's far more programmatic and efficient. It allows us to scale up our programs of work to higher staffing. As a nonprofit organization, we need that predictability of multi-year funding. It also allows the Forest Service to bring on the types of contracting and partnership agreement support it needs to work more effectively with partners. I would say that the Forest Service has made progress under the 10-year strategy that they've announced to prioritize resources, to streamline partnerships, grants, and agreements, to develop more of these large-scale partnership agreements that they're calling keystone agreements. But there are opportunities for that work to be expanded, and I think all of the witnesses here today have mentioned those opportunities spanning tribal government, local government, state government, the private sector and industry, and nonprofit partners. Unleashing those partnerships right now at a time where capacity is one of the greatest limiting factors in accomplishing our work will be critical to everyone's collective success.
Thank you. And this question is for Ms. Schultzeberger. Your testimony mentions a need to support reforestation through support of the U.S. Forest Service Reforestation Nurseries and Genetic Resources Program. Can you speak to the work that's being done to support seed orchards, particularly in states like my own, Oregon, and how good neighbor agreements are important for making that work really effective?
Yeah, great, absolutely. So in the same ways that state agencies can support the Forest Service in, say, timber management or wildfire risk reduction or stream restoration, reforestation through the GNA, states can also lend their capacity and expertise to help with nurseries and seed orchards. So other states have been moving forward with GNA projects with national forests and state seed orchards, and there's many opportunities for us to work together in building our nurseries and seed orchards together. So there's success already in place with other projects, and I think there's great opportunity for this to occur with orchards and nurseries as well.
Thank you. And then just hopefully a quick follow-up. It was recently reported that the state of Washington may actually need to utilize Oregon nurseries to meet their reforestation needs. And the Bipartisan Policy Center has separately identified a gap that the nation's nurseries are not really equipped to meet those skyrocketing demand for tree seedlings. Should we be looking at financing mechanisms like loans and loan guarantees through U.S. Forest Service to support our nation's nurseries?
Yeah, absolutely. And my fellow witnesses also talked about the need for being able to fund those restoration and nursery opportunities. We have failing infrastructure in our nurseries. We have great needs for capacity for seed orchards and also for the staffing to be able to do so. So putting funding towards the nurseries would be very helpful.
And I've been hearing directly from my nurseries on that, so thank you. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Salinas. So we will now turn to our colleague from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Imbergamo, is that how you say it? Imbergamo, okay, got you. Thank you for your testimony this morning. As you're aware, the Farm Bill creates a robust framework for all jurisdictions in managing forest. In my home state of Alabama, upwards of 93% of our state's forests are privately owned. Can you talk a little bit about an active role as far as public-private partnerships and how that plays out in the management of these private forests?
Well, sure. I always say I don't represent the entire forest products industry, just those lucky enough to try to do business with the Forest Service. So that's the perspective I come at it from. My member companies across the country, hardly any of them solely rely on the Forest Service. Probably those in the Dakotas are the most reliant, and those in Idaho as well. I think the reality is if we don't have the national forest well managed, that impacts the ability of private landowners to manage their forests. We're a highly cyclical industry. We're entering a bit of a downturn right at the moment. I always say my members enjoyed a brief bout of profitability the last couple of years. And when we go into these down periods, the Forest Service still manages their land. They're not economically motivated. That helps keep sawmills open and keep wood-consuming facilities in place. And if we can have the national forests that manage for a variety of reasons, they create habitat, they want to reduce fuel loads, that sort of thing, that helps keep the wood infrastructure existent and viable so that when we do have a return to more robust prices, private landowners have outlets for those wood products. So I'd say that the system works in concert, not necessarily with, particularly in the Southeast, it's rather independent.
Thank you. Ms. Schultzeberger, your testimony states that you would like to see a post-disaster forest landowner assistance program bolstered. In Alabama, this is particularly important to our foresters. I am an original co-sponsor of Reps. Carter and Sewell's Disaster Reforestation Act of 2023. Aside from fair post-disaster tax treatment for private forest owners, what technical assistance can be provided to restore the forest to their pre-disaster conditions?
There's a need to move quickly in these situations and get the assistance to the landowners, and also with those that are managing both the agricultural side of things and the forestry side of things. So often FSA lacks that technical forestry expertise, and as I said in my comments earlier today, state forestry agencies have those technical foresters on staff that can help provide that technical assistance and help provide that quick response needed in these situations. And so I think there's opportunities for FSA to lean on state forestry agencies for that technical assistance and outreach to landowners to get them what they need to get ready.
Yeah, and we deal with so many hurricanes. I can remember Hurricane Michael came through, and it looked like you had just dropped a giant lawnmower on all of the southeast part of the state in Georgia. So very often I think it's important that we respond pretty quick in this post-disaster, especially in our part of the world. We lost so much timberland. So,
Yeah.
So thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We'll now turn to Ms. Lucenkamp Perez from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Schultzeberger, you mentioned in your testimony the importance of good neighbor authority, which right now is critical for our forests, especially federal. If the federal agencies aren't able to get boots on the ground, good neighbor authority is critical to leverage state and local partners to get those important forest health projects completed. But we also know there's important work to be done on non-federal lands, which is why I'm proud to be introducing a bill with Congressman Fulker, the Treating Tribes and Counties as Good Neighbor Act. This bill expands the Good Neighbor Authority to allow tribes and counties like mine to reinvest funds they receive from Good Neighbor Authority timber sales into restoration projects and expand the abilities of all partners to have a restoration performed on their lands, not just federal lands. This bill recognizes that tribes and counties are on the front lines of the challenges facing our federal lands, such as wildfire. And, we, those of us living in the WUI, living in these timber counties, we have a lot of incentive to get this work done, and that's one of the reasons I think it's so important that we support this legislation. In your testimony, you speak about the importance of expanding it. Could you speak to the changes, what these changes would mean for our states, counties, and tribes, and the health of our forests broadly?
Sure, and I mean, we all know in managing natural resources, we've got to work at a landscape scale, across boundaries, across ownerships, and it requires a collaborative approach. And so GNA has really worked for states in working with the Forest Service in getting good work on the ground, adding that capacity. And it works for states, and we feel that it could work for tribes and counties too. They just need those tools and those funds to go back to them to be able to do the same level of work that the states are doing. And this only adds that capacity and allows for further work within the national system and across that landscape of the GNA.
Thank you. I'd also like to talk about some of the challenges our resource-heavy counties face as we think about how to manage their lands and support our local communities. Skamania County, where I live in the southeast corner of my district, is 80% Forest Service land. It is a lot of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Mr. Brandt, your comments about the economic restraints of Idaho County government really resonated with me as counties in my district face similar issues. I really know what it feels like to, these county governments feel like they are always coming with their hand out, asking for something when they want to think about ways to ensure their long-term prosperity. From your perspective, Mr. Brandt, how can we help these resource-heavy counties generate a sustainable income? Like, what existing federal programs can and should be leveraged to ensure their long-term economic viability?
Well, right off the bat, it's just land management. Growing up in Idaho County, I can only literally remember one day that our valley was socked in with smoke back in the day. However, at that time, we had 8 sawmills running, vibrant sawmills. Now we have 1, and we have weeks and weeks of being socked in with smoke. So the component of tourism goes down when you have a summer filled full of smoke. Nobody wants to be on the rivers. And so dealing with the fire issue is probably the #1 aspect outside the actual timber harvest. To be able to, one of the issues right now, and talking to Chief Moore, and the Forest Service has money to attempt to increased harvest, but from that, they believe that an industry is going to come in and build a $50 million facility, and that's just not going to happen unless the federal government can come up with some way of guaranteeing that fiber supply for 30-plus years. Nobody's going to come in and spend that kind of money in anticipation that the government isn't going to change their mind and shut down timber harvest.
Thank you. I'd like to touch briefly on the importance of workforce development within the timber and forestry sector. We saw so many of our biggest timber county losing their forestry programs and their high school levels. So in the last 30 seconds we have, I just think it's important that, we are thinking about building out a domestic workforce that can take on these jobs and enrich the local rural communities. Tourism is great, but we also need to focus on the natural resources we have. Mr. Holmes, would have loved to hear more from you on this, about how we can address these constraints in workforce development, but thank you for your work on that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you for your questions on that for our colleague from Washington. I'll turn to our colleague from Oregon, Ms. Chavez-DeRemer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize for not being here for the live testimony, but I did read the testimony that was submitted to us. So I just have a few questions. Ms. Schulzenberger, did I get that right?
Schulzebarger, yep.
Thank you.
Very good.
Well, there were some technical assistance questions that were asked by my colleagues here. And so this might be a repeat for you, but can you tell me some examples of the technical assistance provided by the National Association of State Foresters to private landowners? And why is TA, technical assistance so critical of a component to achieving state forest agencies' common mission of protecting America's forests? And have you identified any other opportunities for improvement in delivering the technical assistance specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing that most of the forests across the United States are privately owned, and there's a lot of technical information regarding forest management. So you've got restoration needs after a wildfire, or needing to manage the forest to reduce the potential impacts of wildfire or the impacts from invasive species. So there's a lot of different ways that we connect with landowners to make them understand those issues that are potentially out there, or how best to sustainably manage their forests moving forward. There's a lot of details and information that the technical assistant staff and foresters provide, and make those connections with landowners to understand that there is opportunities and available funding or connections with consulting foresters to be able to best manage those lands that they have in their back 40 or the back 100 or 200 acres.
Thank you. Commissioner Brandt, you mentioned in your statement frivolous special interest lawsuits only serve to delay much-needed management of the national forest system. You also suggested in your testimony that federal regulations drastically reduce timber harvests within the national forest system. So kind of as a follow-up to those, how does the Endangered Species Act affect your work on both the federal and private lands? And are there any programs that are especially hard to implement because of ESA?
With regards to the programs, I can't really answer that directly, but with regards to ESA, right now, the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest, which has the biggest presence, I've got 6 national forests in my little county, and they have the heaviest presence, and they have right now 3 projects, 2 big ones that are tied up in lawsuits because of the ESA issues. And so that's the caveat. As hard as the Forest Service employees recognize that they need to manage the land, but whatever they do, there is a group out there that would rather it literally burn up naturally than have loggers go in there and actually treat the lands.
Thank you. Mr. Holmes, the Forest Service was allotted over $10 billion from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. With that in mind, some of the testimony we've heard today noted that the Forest Service is challenged in hiring and retaining workers, and I'm concerned that a large pool of money like that going to an underemployed agency could lead to lost dollars and irresponsible spending. How can Congress provide the proper oversight or this funding on how partners like you or your organization help the Forest Service implement these dollars and ensure they reach the communities that are desperately in need?
Thank you for that question. Our organization's been heavily involved in the workforce issue and believe that there are opportunities for cooperators, such as nonprofits, to play the role of essentially serving as the farm team for our federal agency partners. It's hard to get folks and talent into many of the rural places where most of this work needs to occur. And organizations like ourselves can help develop new training, new pathways that bring people from their academic institutions and backgrounds into careers in this service and position them to effectively onboard into the federal system. So we'd love to see the agency taking more advantage of those opportunities around restoration work and rightfully agree that there's a significant need to bring a focus both to the acute needs around workforce but longer term issues as well.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you to our colleague from Oregon. I'll recognize myself once again for 5 full minutes this time. And indeed, we will have additional rounds of questions for those that would wish to stay or come on back. All right, Ms. Schultzberger, again, our states are on opposite ends of the country, but both have our home areas live the importance of a proper forest management and our industry to our local economies of the timber industry. So the 2014 Farm Bill expanded the Good Neighbor Authority to all 50 states, and the 2018 Farm Bill expanded to counties and tribes, as has been emphasized heavily on the panel here today, and we got stuff to fix on that with the ability to have the revenue be more flexible to put it right back into the work that they're doing. So indeed, has our attention, and you've all done a really good job of underlining that today. So we'll work hard on that in this upcoming Farm Bill to fix what was basically an oversight or a last-minute something on that, okay? So, but please emphasize for us what other incentives can be provided to both public and private partners to continue and expand the work that are so greatly needed in the West as well as in your region.
Specific to GNA or just generally?
We hope to get the GNA fix done, but expanding beyond that when we're talking about the pace and scale of forestry work that needs to be done. I think mostly on federal, but anything on your mind on
Sure, yeah.
other incentives we can move in this direction?
I think when you think about, increasing that pace and scale, obviously, and I had already mentioned the need for partnerships and being able to work at that large landscape collaborative scale across different ownerships. And tools like GNA, tools like the Joint Chiefs grants, the tools like LSR really enable and support that landscape scale, which really we need to look at when you think about managing invasives or you're looking at restoring a landscape. Being able to cross those boundaries and have flexible ways that we can get funds to partners, to counties, different state agencies and federal, to be able to be flexible in getting those funds out there. And so, GNA, Joint Chiefs, LSR, and I had also talked about that rural piece in the LSR language, and really one of the
Yeah, once you drill down on that a little
Sure.
more, in your opening
Yeah.
comments, you were talking about that, the 50,000 and less and lower population towns, and how
Right.
that's been a real impediment, on WUI and everything. Please.
Right, and a lot of times, many of the issues that we have result around people in forests, right? That's how often invasives or pests and diseases are spread. And it's different across the U.S., I understand this, but in Pennsylvania, 99% of our wildfires are human-caused. And so we see an increase in wildfires in those communities, that 50,000 and above, and being able to target funds in those areas where we need to be connecting with people, working to reduce that wildfire risk around those high populated communities. It just really has made it difficult to make those connections where we really need to make those connections. So that would be helpful.
On the larger ones, how does that work on the smaller ones?
The
50,000
smaller ones,
less?
we're able funding is able to be put in those smaller areas, but in the larger areas, then those funds or that grant program cannot be utilized in that area.
So that's something we need to be looking at too. Would we expand the number or raise the number? What would we do?
We would, essentially raise the number or remove that rural designation. So that would allow it to be in all community types. Trees are beneficial in many, many different ways, or forest management in those, be it rural, community, or urban forest is really important. There's
Thank you.
great opportunities.
Mr. Bergamo, on a post-fire situation, when we're getting into salvage and recovery, what are some of the what can we do to fix the bogging down of that? I'm short on time here, but we'll come back later perhaps.
Sure. One of the things we could do is the agency gave itself a new authority called Determination of NEPA Adequacy, which would enable them to use an already decided NEPA document, and they can make the determination that NEPA document adequately addresses the issues after a fire, and they can still do the project. If only part of the project area is affected, unfortunately, what we frequently see is the agency drops back, reinitiates NEPA, possibly reinitiates ESA consultation, and wood has an expiration date on it. Depending on where you are, it's longer or shorter, depending on if you're in an arid climate or a humid climate.
Yeah.
But using that authority more aggressively, and frankly, having a plan before the disturbance. We know what kind of disturbances are affecting the national forests, fire in the west, hurricanes in the southeast, wind events in the northeast, and having a plan on what to do on general forest acres and implementing it immediately would help address reforestation and capture more value.
Okay, thank you. My time's passed on. Our Ranking Member Salinas, do you have an additional?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing us this additional time. Mr. Brandt, in your testimony, you mentioned the need to reauthorize both the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program and the Landscape Scale Restoration Program, and we've discussed this a lot here. And you mentioned needing stronger partnerships to make to ensure that these programs are successful. From your experience with the Clearwater Basin Collaborative, what opportunities do you think there are for stronger partnerships?
Well, number one, if the counties were able to gain the GNA receipts aspects to put back into the ground. I mean, you're dealing with small counties. We don't have a forester. We got a fire mitigation person, but we are limited. Our noxious weed department has 2 employees. I mean, that's really the component that I see as the largest gain is if we can have receipts to go back to the ground, we can hire people. I don't have to take 6 to 9 months to do a background check like the Forest Service does. I can hire a forester tomorrow and put him out on the ground the next day. And same with noxious weeds or any employee. So again, funding components is probably the #1 aspect of beyond the agreements.
Thank you. And, you know, Oregon is fortunate. We received nearly $11.7 million last April for 5 of these projects, and I think our communities are really excited about it. And this may be the same question, just asked in a different way, but what is, in your opinion, needed to maximize collaboratives like these, and what changes should be made to the program?
I think they've I've covered it
Exhausted
best
that.
I can.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, it gets into funding aspects and anything that could, again, limit the lawsuits that come about. They attempted, Congress in putting together the collaborative efforts attempted to take that away, but again, there are groups out there that do not want the Forest Service to manage the land. They want it to be natural, and they're just sitting back waiting for the opportunity to sue to tie up a project.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Bergamo, in your opinion, does the U.S. Forest Service have capacity issues right now? And do you believe current staffing issues contribute to those capacity issues?
Yes, they do have staffing issues now. They lost over 8,000 silviculturists and engineers in the early 2000s. They had about 8,000 retirements coming at them, and they largely did not restaff in those positions. And they are down quite a number of positions. I would say that my industry is also down quite a number of positions in the mills that have closed and also in the mills that have remained open. We've done things like automate and contract for things. That's definitely a way that they could increase their capacity. The other way that they could increase their capacity would be to reduce the planning time, the lead time required to get a project on the ground, and that would be through more aggressive use of the expedited authorities that Congress has already passed.
Thank you. And one follow-up question. Will the funding provided by the Inflation Reduction Act help address the 39% drop in forest management staff that was brought about by fire borrowing?
Yes, both Inflation Reduction and the Infrastructure Act should provide some ability to make up for some of those things. The one thing about both of those laws is they were enacted without much regard for the agency's budget structure. And so that might be a worthwhile conversation with the agency, is how to better align those pots of money with the new budget structure, which quite frankly within the agency is poorly understood.
Thank you so much. And I yield back.
Our committee chairman has rejoined us, and I'll recognize him for 5 minutes for any questions he has.
Chairman, thank you so much. My apologies, I having to step out here with, but I'm glad to be back. And I thank you all and your written testimony. And a couple questions. Invasive insects and plant species have had devastating effects on forest health and need to be treated through active management. I would argue using landscape approach, like we try to do with addressing preventing wildfires. You know, we've seen this devastation in Pennsylvania with pests such as the spotted lanternfly, the gypsy moth, and the current plant species of the day, which is a glossy buckthorn. Director Schulzebarger, can you speak to the challenges that we've seen in Pennsylvania with invasive species, and how can Congress assist the Forest Service and forest industry to work with to work with state forestry agencies, forest managers, and other partners to address these challenges.
Yeah, it seems that our crisis in the east is definitely invasive species, and glossy buckthorn is the new one. And if you're not aware, it's a bush that essentially changes the character, no longer forest, and is quite impactful. But the ability for organizations, be it federal, state, county, to be able to, or nonprofits and landowners to be able to work together at a landscape scale is probably the most critical way to make change. In Pennsylvania, around the Allegheny National Forest, we have the Allegheny Forest Health Collaborative, which has been an extremely successful group and tool in getting information out there about what is going on, how to address and treat some of these species, and help bring together potential funding streams and share ways that we can make an impact to these resources at a larger scale. Because if everybody's doing one piece here and there, we're really not going to address the issue of these spreading invasive species. So the ability to get these funds like GNA Joint Chiefs, LSR, and there's cooperative weed management areas, to be able to have funding go there to provide that technical assistance, to prioritize funding and really target those treatments at a landscape scale to help address an issue is probably the most critical piece, is having everybody involved.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is an all hands on deck, right?
It is.
And reducing the barriers to that. And again, I appreciate with your testimony that you had provided, it's trying to anticipate unintended consequences and provide clarity so that as folks in the executive branch with Forest Service are executing exactly what the intent of Congress was. And believe it or not, that doesn't always happen. So that's where the oversight is so important, that we stay at the table. Mr. Imbergamo, good to see you. Are you familiar with the Cottonwood case?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Can you tell us what the status of this precedent is?
Yes. Sorry. So Cottonwood was a case in Montana, possibly Idaho. Sorry. And the gist of it is the result is that the Forest Service has to go and consult with Fish and Wildlife Service on the underlying forest plan. Even if Fish and Wildlife Service has no concerns about the project, they have no take or jeopardy concerns for the listed species. This has made the Forest Service go back and consult on forest plans that are old enough to drive, some of which were adopted in the 1980s. In fact, the injunction that was in place in New Mexico in Mr. Vasquez's district was on a plan that was adopted, I think, in 1989. And that enjoined all activity for about 13 months, and that area was the area that the Hermit's Peak fire burned. The Obama administration appealed that to the Supreme Court, and Congress provided a sort of stay of execution in the 2018 omnibus bill that actually expires at the end of this month. And that fix only partially addressed the precedent. We actually right now have, in Region 1, which is where Idaho is, we have about 300 million feet enjoined in Cottonwood cases. That's enough to frame about 26,000 houses.
That's a lot of fuel for wildfires, which are devastating, as we know, to forest health, human health, the economy. And so I'm looking forward to working with the chairman and the ranking member as we put together this forestry title in the Farm Bill so that we can really advance and I think build on the successes that we had in 14 and 18 for the forestry title. So thank you, and my time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will get after that. So I feel we can kind of keep going here a little bit, and we have you, so we haven't taken that much time yet. So Commissioner Brandt, in your statement, you talked about frivolous special interest lawsuits that only serve to delay much-needed management of the forest system. Would you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I certainly feel it in my area in Northern California, especially post-fire, but this is important pre-fire, too, on being able to do the common sense management.
Yes, sir, and I turn to my other witnesses with regards to, and the term skips my mind, but when individuals sue and then they're reimbursed expenses.
Equal access to justice.
Equal access to justice, I think, is a huge component that fuels that fire, if you will. And if there could be something done with that, I think that would assist the agency in a huge way.
Elaborate a little more on that, please.
If somebody sues the Forest Service and wins, the Forest Service basically writes the suing entity a check.
Yeah. And they tend to get a little gun shy about trying to step out and do projects, it seems. So.
Yeah, that is true, Chairman.
So the federal regulations have reduced timber harvests within the forest system. What regulations do we need to be looking at, whether it's part of the Farm Bill or outside of that, to, I mean, we're not trying to get away with murder here. It's we're behind. We're behind by 50 years. Go ahead.
Absolutely. You know, again, lifelong resident of the Clearwater Valley. My house overlooks the confluence of the South Fork into the main stem. It is where I live, I play. It's where I'm going to retire. I'm not trying to over-harvest somebody else's backyard. This is my home, and it's important to me. And the dynamic of I sort of lost track there. The dynamic of what we want to get done on the ground is complicated by the Forest Service's processes. Let me just, the Forest Service never gets rid of any of their internal process. They just keep stacking on top. And that gets back to their inability to hire employees, where it takes 9 months to just do a background check. You can get a fully automatic machine gun, and it takes less to do a background check there. But just to get employed by a federal agency like the Forest Service, it's just
Well, that calls back the process I think several on the panel have talked about with workforce here, with the frustration of getting the workforce filled up, whether it was within the agency or even out there in the private sector. So we have to incentivize that somehow. And it's to your issue you talked about, Mr. Brandt, earlier too, with 83% of the land, I think in your county in Idaho,
Yep.
is federally owned. So we get into the PILT, payment in lieu of taxes.
and SRS.
That we hope to keep funding, I guess, or something. And the SRS, Secure Rural Schools, which those folks, they came to my office here recently. It seems like a hat in hand every year or every at least extension of keeping the backfill from the loss of the industry. Now, anybody on the panel wish to touch on those, the PILT or especially the SRS?
Well, I jump out first. Again, going back to the days when I was in school, our school system was the wealthiest school system in the state. Now we're one of the poorest. Again, because we were doing regular timber harvest projects, we would reap 25% of the stumpage fee. And now that we've gone away from really logging, but going more into regular stewardship instead of standard timber harvest, we don't get that. That 25% is not set back for the counties, for the schools and roads.
So that's an anomaly too with the stewardship, where the Secure Rural Schools used to receive the timber receipts for schools and roads within counties. The stewardship that money has bypassed that.
Yes, sir, it has. And I just note that right now, about 25% of the Forest Service sale program goes out as stewardship contracts. So those do not generate receipts for the counties. In California, it's north of, I think, 35 or 38%.
And that also needs to be repaired in the Good Neighbor Authority, where the dollars that would come from that work are not staying locally either, to help replace the Secure Rural Schools funding that we have to come hat in hand to DC for, right?
I believe that's correct, sir, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I just note that the component of stewardship funding that the agency gets, it's very specific on how the agency can use it. It's to go to the ground and to treat the ground, not necessarily a payment to the county schools and infrastructure.
Right, okay, well, maybe that's not so bad. All right, I'll recognize Ranking Member Salinas, and we'll probably call it a day after that, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Holmes, you can bring us home here. You mentioned the need to authorize and appropriate more funding for the Reforestation Nursery and Genetic Resources Program. How would this increase benefit federal lands?
Thank you for the question. The Ringer program supports primarily technical and financial assistance for state and tribal nurseries, and in that regard, complements a lot of the work that happens on our federal lands and federal nurseries. As you know, many of the impacts from insect and disease, wildfire, know no boundary, and so we view the Ringer investment as an important complementary investment to what Congress has authorized through the Replan Act moving forward.
Thank you, and I do have a follow-up. So your second recommendation is to establish a competitive grant funding opportunity for reforestation, research, nursery, and seed collection, seed storage, and workforce needs. Why is it important that this is done in partnership with state agricultural and forestry research stations, colleges, and universities, and other researchers?
Right now, our conventional practices for reforestation, as I mentioned during my testimony, are really based on these rather antiquated field trials we did many years ago with certain spacings, the opportunities to go back in to do thinning for regrowth, to do treatments of herbicide or other things to control competing vegetation. The realities we're facing in a post-fire context in particular, but also in response to these other threats, require completely rethinking those practices. They also require rethinking what seed and genetic sources are going to be the most productive over the long haul in those regions. And then we also have to integrate future fuels treatments and think about what the future condition of fuels is on the forest as we're reestablishing stand structures. There's currently no funding to do that kind of applied work and research, and in addition to support the needed monitoring, our land-grant universities, our agricultural and forestry experiment stations could be at the tip of the spear of supporting a lot of the work, and indeed many are, and I think could play an exciting convening role, bringing public sector, private sector partners together around that set of problems.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Salinas. I think at this point I would like to offer all of our panelists 60 seconds to each to close with any compelling thoughts we've missed here today. So let's start on the left, Ms. Schultzberger again.
Oh, okay, rapid fire, compelling thought. Yeah, I think, essentially what we've talked about is we have some good starts in the Farm Bill and some areas that we could provide some clarity to be able to really provide those on-the-ground results through GNA or LSR. And and we just really appreciate the time and listening to the different opportunities, and we're happy to talk further about any of these opportunities to make some effective changes to really broaden our landscape scale approach. So thank you very much.
Thank you again for your testimony and your appearance today, Ms. Schultzberger. Mr. Brandt.
Well, I just thank the committee, and this is exciting to have this opportunity and have the possibility of fixing a potentially broke system. So look forward to moving forward with the Farm Bill and hopefully finding a solution to not have the counties coming back and with hat in hand asking for PILT payments and SRS payments.
All right, thank you. We look forward to any communications you would like to send to us to help us in shaping the Farm Bill policy. Thank you, Mr. Brandt, for your time and appearance here today. Mr. Bergamo.
So in the summer of 2014, I had lunch in Greenville in your district. and it's my understanding that that town is no longer there, that it was burned to the ground by that fire.
75% of the buildings are not there. They are chipping away at coming back. They got a great spirit there, so yes, sir.
And I think if I can try to be compelling, the compelling thought is we have to start acting year-round like that is the crisis that we are facing. We cannot afford to have summers where we burn an entire national forest in one summer. That's what we've experienced in 2020 and 2021. Thankfully, 2022 was a bit of a reprieve, but the conditions that would allow that to happen are present on the landscape, and we need to start acting like a change in paradigm is sincere and is happening year-round, not just when there's no trouble mobilizing resources when there's a large fire on the horizon. We just have to realize that fire is always on the horizon, even when we cannot see the smoke plume.
Appreciate it. Thank you for that. Mr. Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. We very much appreciate the discussion today, as well as, again, I wanted to reiterate our thanks to you for the focus you're bringing on our field as part of this subcommittee's work. One area we didn't touch on today is the importance of forestry that spans multiple other titles of the Farm Bill, notably research, conservation, and rural development. I just want to highlight that integration is really valuable to our industry and our partnerships. And also want to offer again that our organization's eager to be a resource, pragmatic voice as part of this Farm Bill reauthorization for you and your staff. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Ranking Member Salinas, do you have any closing statement or thoughts?
Yes, just quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses today for your travel and your time. You provided great insight into and expertise on forestry provisions from the 2018 Farm Bill and possible areas where we can make some positive changes, and I'm looking forward to that work. Your views will essentially help guide us to reduce the risk posed by catastrophic wildfire, pests, and disease, and promote the creation of jobs and rural opportunity, in particularly in my district. So I'm really excited to figure out what the restoration economy really looks like moving forward. And I'd like to thank the chairman, Chair Lamalfa, for organizing this kickoff hearing for the Forestry Sub, and I look forward to more hearings and events as we work towards that 2023 Farm Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Salinas. I want to thank our staff, our teams on each side for really making it happen in the organization of today's hearing. I look forward to doing a lot more of this. I think we indeed have to have a lot more discussion and action to help our nation's forests. As my constituents, when I go see them, they're just tired of being under the gun of fire danger. I'm tired of seeing my towns being threatened and disappearing in a ball of fire, loss of life. As mentioned, 85 lives lost in that large fire in Paradise. We have to look at some of the issues that need to be truly reformed, not to skirt the laws that are on the books, but to make them modernize, make them work for us. The NEPA issue, whether it's pre-fire work or post-fire, needs to be brought into line so that it actually is practical for the people doing good things on the ground. Endangered Species Act, we need to look and see, is that really working well to recover species for the offset of what it costs in time and effort to do projects that need to be done. The area of lawsuits, as was mentioned as well. It seems it's more a way to just block the good work that needs to be done and put money in the pockets of those that have nothing to do with the industry or the communities or rely on the product. Why is the United States the #2 importer of wood of any country in the world when we have so much in our own backyard? As I kind of heard mentioned in the end, we need to look at this with urgency. We do have an emergency situation. We did dodge a bullet a lot in 2022 with the massive fires we saw in 21 and 20 and 19 and 18, and going back into, a little farther back into some of the North Bay area, my colleagues like Mr. Thompson and others have had to deal with over there. We've got to treat this with great urgency. And I don't always see that in the pace and scale with which some of our representatives or agencies move. So I mean, my goal with the immediate issue of fire danger is that let's get these fires put out before the fire has a name and before there's a T-shirt vendor on site with the name of that fire and yet another graphic for us. We can do a lot more of this in time, okay? So we have much to do. I look forward to more of these hearings and bringing a broader scope of folks into place to look at all the aspects, do something that's fair, something that's right, and at the end of the day, very productive. So with that, thanks again to our panelists. We do appreciate your time and effort to be here and your testimony, and look forward to communicating with you going forward. Thanks to our ranking member for her patience and time, as I'm really, really into this and want to see some good stuff happen. So thanks so much. God bless you. And this hearing is adjourned.